Do you want to get your Christmas cards done and use up an entire paper pad from your stash? Hi, I'm Jess from JessCrafts.com, and I'm going to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So let's get started. We're going to make 64 Christmas cards today from one 6x8 paper pad, 64 A2 size cards. The paper pad is Simple Stories, Holly Days. It is new for 2021, but you could use a lot of these ideas with any 6x8 paper pad you had, and you might be able to adapt some if you have a 6x6 paper pad, but I also have plenty of tutorials for that. I'm going to be using my templates. I created 5 templates recently specifically for 6x8 paper, and it will show you how to cut your paper and then make a bunch of A2 size cards with no scraps. So most of the templates make 2, some make 3 or 4, and all the templates are available on my blog, which will be linked in the video description, so you can download the PDF of the template and know exactly how I cut everything and how I assemble them. It'll show you a sketch exactly what to do. I want to step you through the process and how I make some of my decisions so that it's not as overwhelming to go from template to finished cards. Here is my sketch binder where I keep all of the templates. That is getting really full, and that one is dedicated only to the templates and sketches that I've personally made. And so I'm feeling kind of proud of how many different designs I have available over on my website for you guys. But today I'm going to focus on these 6x8 one-sheet wonders and making A2 size cards. I specifically designed some of these templates to incorporate 3x4 journaling cards, as often these 6x8 paper pads include these 3x4 cut aparts. But this is also great if you just have project life cards that are 3x4. These 6x8 paper pads often also include these really large sentiments or really large designs that take up the entire 6x8 paper pad, or paper, the whole sheet of paper. And they're great for sticking in frames, but I'm going to try to think of ideas of how to use them other than just always flipping to the back. So for my design here, I knew I wanted to start with which papers I would pair well with my 3x4 cards. So I went in and I did pick this Holly Days that has the sentiment on the back, and I am only going to use it for its backside. But I promise I will use some others in different ways. But that one, I just thought that the red background with the holly leaves worked well with all of those 3x4 cut aparts, and I'm going to reserve them for template number 4. I'm going to go through each template and show you how I assemble the card, but here I'm focusing on how I'm picking my papers so that you can see how I would do that and how to maybe make it a little bit less intimidating for yourself if you have trouble picking out papers. This is another template number 1 that includes 3x4 cards. But then it calls for the 3x4 cards and these 1.5 by 4 inch strips. So on the template, to use it as a one-sheet wonder, well and truly, you would cut off the 3x4 card from the same sheet of paper. I'm not going to do that because I have these 3x4 card sheets, so technically it's going to be like a 2-sheet wonder. And that particular large sentiment paper that I picked had the sentiment kind of only in the center, and there was a good chunk of room on the left and right. So I can use that large floral for the 1.5 by 4 inch strips that I need. And I'll cut that whole paper into 1.5 by 4 inch strips and another whole paper into the 3x4s. That'll come up both times that I do the 3x4s. I show it to you as a one-sheet wonder in the template, in the PDF, just because that way it's more applicable to all situations. But hopefully it's clear how you would be able to just cut one sheet as 3x4s and one sheet as the other design. I am picking out for template number 2 here, papers that will look good when they are cut to really thin strips. Now, I wanted to be able to use that Santa in an interesting way, but honestly, he's so big, it just wasn't going to work out. I had thought about if I could just maybe just use the Santa or something, but it just doesn't work with no scrap templates. However, we're back to one of those other ones with that large sentiment in the center, but plenty of room on the left and right. So I'm going to pick one of those for template number 2 because I can use the edges for some of the strips and then use the backside for the rest of the strips. I wound up picking enough paper to make 16 of template number 2. And to be honest, I regret it. Template number 2 is it takes a lot more time to put together than many of the other templates. Template number 1 is super fast to put together. So if like you're in a real time crunch, take every piece of paper in your paper pad and turn it into template number 1. Or template number 3 is also super fast, but you'll see that as I kind of go through each one. And for template number 3, I also had to consider smaller strips because it's not as thin as template number 2, but it calls for like 1 inch by 4 inch. So what I always do there is I'll take my hand and cover the sides of the paper and just leave like a 1 inch gap and make sure that it looks good, even if I only have a tiny, like that 1 inch strip of paper. Or if I have a smaller sheet, you also bring like 2 rulers, but I find your hand is like the perfect tool. 2 pieces of cardstock are great too, just because it really blocks out that extra. Whereas if you're using a ruler, they're so thin, it's hard to imagine just the strip because you can see everything else through it or next to it because they're so thin. Really just get your hands, 2 pieces of cardstock, and just check. Like if I make it only half an inch wide because the template calls for half an inch, or here, this is template number 5, it calls for these 1.5 by 2 inch rectangles, you'll want to do the same thing. Somehow, just before you're going to get to chopping the papers, check that it still looks good, teeny tiny like that. I did have a few where it cut some of the images that are in the background kind of small, and I thought it worked, but I could see for some of those larger patterns it might not. So now that I have taken all the pattern papers and I've decided which papers I like for which templates, or which papers I need, because I need those 3x4 cut aparts for some of them, I'm going to take the printed out PDF template and my pattern papers, and I'm going to put them in these plastic folders. You can get these plastic folders from all kinds of sources, and you can just use a manila folder that you staple the edges of, whatever you want to do. But I will link some in case. So to assemble card number 1, I am taking 2 4 by 1.5 inch strips, and I'm matting them on pieces of cardstock that are a 1/4 inch bigger on each side, as well as a 1/4 inch bigger for that 3x4 journaling card that's going to be in the center. Then I'm going to tape, as you can see in the sketch there in the top left corner, and you'll be able to download it. I'm going to tape them directly to the top and bottom with like no gap, right to the very, very edges. I do find that sometimes the card base will wind up a little bit bigger than the cardstock mats or whatever. And I think it's in part because sometimes the cardstock that you buy is not exactly 8.5 by 11. So when I make my card base, I might get just a 1/8 of an inch bigger, and I have to trim those off. I'm also sticking a piece of cardstock here in the center because when I place this image on top, it would kind of like dip down in the center between those 2 pieces, and that would not be as flat as I was like. So that's why I'm putting that piece of cardstock there. Here for card number 2, I am using 1/8 inch mats. They're not my favorite because they're a lot more finicky. I really, really prefer 1/4 inch mats. But in order to make this design work, the idea that I had in my mind, and have no scraps, I had to do the 1/8 inch mats. Otherwise, things are like really jammed in there on the card. And it's particularly challenging because these papers are only 1/2 an inch wide, and therefore the little cardstock mat is only 5/8 of an inch wide. And the smaller the measurements go, the harder time I personally have of getting everything super accurate. I found that while I'm assembling it here, I'm showing you the mats as described in the template, that I actually find it easier to take your large piece of cardstock and cut the 5/8 inch strip that the mats need to be, and I lay down the strips on top of it, so it's 5/8 of an inch wide, but then it's like the full 11 inches of cardstock, and I tape down my strips to that and then cut them off, rather than trying to perfectly cut the length that I need. I only do the width. Hopefully that makes sense. I made another video for this card, but it wasn't until after I had recorded everything that I figured out that just having that longer strip really works. So I would give that a shot if you're going to make a bunch of these. Like I said, I made 16 of these, and it's a lot more cutting than some of the other ones. So I regretted making 16 of these and then only 8 of design number 4 because I really liked the way design number 4 turned out, and I think it would have been more fun to have more of that one. Even though it's also a little bit tricky, it's not nearly as tricky as this one. So now I also have to make sure that everything is evenly spaced and, you know, kind of like even from the center, but even from each other, etc. And I'm using my grid mat to help me out a lot with that. It would have been much harder without the grid mat, but you could certainly do it with a ruler instead by laying a ruler alongside. And a little bit of the cardstock is hanging off the edge because I just matted it with 1/8 of an inch on all sides. But if you look at the sketch, the pattern paper should butt up right next to. I'm showing you here how I would kind of use a ruler to help me as well. But a combination of ruler and grid mat and, you know, either one. But really trying to get all these things lined up is quite finicky. But once you do that, you can do the rest of them by just lining it up against this example. So you don't have to be this fussy the next time. You're just going to take the 2 card bases and like slide them right up next to each other and use that as a guide for where to lay down all of your pieces. I'm not sure if that's super clear, but I think that made a few cards, you'll kind of understand what I'm saying. But like if you butt up the 2 cards, then you know exactly where to lay down the strips. And then you turn it to the, you know, so that the 2 bottoms are touching and you know where to lay down the strips. Don't, you know, have to try to measure it every time. That would take forever. Okay, so this card did need something to finish it off. That first card, they were all incorporated with the journaling cards. And I will show you some of the finishing off of other cards at the end because like I said, I am making 64 cards today, but I'm not going to film all 64 of them. You guys don't have that kind of time. You got to go start making your Christmas cards. That's the whole point of sharing this video. So I will show you some other embellishment ideas at the end, but for this one, I went into the bits and pieces from Simple Stories, and I picked one that I thought would work well. I think this particular design calls for something a little bit more long and thin rather than tall. So like that bear didn't really work well for me because he kind of draws your eye away from the center strip and draws your attention like up and down on the card, whereas I think the card is, you know, kind of wants your attention to stay in that center. Well, you know, that bigger strip that's at the bottom of the card. Okay, so we're on design number 3. And there's a coordinating blog post that tells you exactly how many I made of each of these, but design number 1 was 12, design number 2 was 16, and there's also 16 of design number 3. Number 3, the template makes 4 cards per sheet of 6x8 pattern paper, so you get a lot of cards, but also really quick. However, it has a lot of white space, which I know not everyone likes as much white space as I do. I actually like to give my cards some kind of breathing room. I don't always fill them up a lot, and I think that's why sketch number 2 is a little bit hard for me. It's not, I actually like a more simple sketch like this one better. Again, 1/4 inch mats, that's almost always my preference, but every once in a while, like sketch number 2, I have to do 1/8 inch because it makes it work. So here, these are just the 2 1/4 inch. You're going to make sure that the strip in the back goes all the way across and covers the complete card base. And if you have to trim it up like I did, pretty quick, just do it with a pair of scissors. But again, that's just because sometimes when you make your own card bases, which I do have a video on if you want to save money and make your own card bases with 8.5 by 11 cardstock, sometimes they're not perfectly 4 1/4 or something like that. I'm going to pop up one of the elements from the Simple Stories bits and pieces. And I did again use a little bit of cardstock to prop up the top and bottom of that middle panel. For design number 4, this one is also a little bit tricky because you're going to be cutting some triangles. but the template gives you some very specific details about how to cut the triangles and how to measure them. But I am going to, because I'm using the 3x4 cards, remember that I will cut all of the triangles for the 4 cards out of one sheet, and then all of the 3x4s for the 4 cards out of another sheet. But you can, if you want, get it all out of one sheet of paper. Basically, these bigger triangles that aren't cut in half have a 2-inch base at the bottom, and they're 3 inches tall from the point to the base. The sketch will explain it. You don't need to worry too much about it. I don't add any mats for these. Mats for triangle shapes are really hard to measure. You can certainly do it, and if you wanted to cut them with dies or something, but if you want to do a no scrap design, which is my favorite way of crafting, because I don't like having lots of little bits and pieces or weird things to use, I really like to get the most out of my supplies, then I would just skip the mats, and I still think it looks great, but then I did put that 1/4-inch mat on the 3x4 journaling card to really make that stand out. I don't really have to finish those off because they have the design from the journaling card, but I will give you some different ideas for how to pick out your embellishments at the end. Moving on to design number 5. I made 8 of design number 4, and I'm going to make 12 of design number 5. This has these little rectangles in the back and then a larger rectangle in the center. It's pretty close to a 3x4, so if you really wanted to make the design with 3x4 cards, you could adapt some of the numbers and make the little triangles in the back a bit smaller, but then you're going to leave more of a gap of white space in between each one. So it's just kind of what you like to do. I'm using my ATG throughout this whole process. That is the name of my adhesive. It is a glider, and I like that the refills are pretty cheap. So if you like to make a lot of cards like I do, then it can be very, very cost effective. Something to note about this particular sketch is that the room between the top and bottom rectangle is thinner than the room between the left and right rectangle. So down the center of the card, that gap between them is bigger than the gap between them and the side of the card or them and the bottom rectangle. That is just so that you can see more of them hanging out of the edge. If you put them a little closer together than the center panel, that the one with the Santa on it right now, you wouldn't see some of the pink paper peeking out from it. Instead, it would look a lot more flush. I like to have the pink paper sticking out, and so that's why I push them out towards the sides of the card and leave that larger gap in the center. If you'd like to make, as I mentioned, if you like to make a lot of cards like I do, then that ATG is great because the adhesive is cheap because you can refill it. And the same here with this Barely Art glue. You can buy refills and keeps the cost down. But the reason I make lots of cards is because I like to donate my cards. And if you have never heard of that, I have an entire page on my website that is dedicated to like a listing organizations where you can donate your cards. And then I have another page that shares jokes that you can put inside of your cards. But with that thought in mind, how many Christmas cards do you guys make? Leave me a comment. I feel like I make a crazy amount because there's all these places that I can donate them to, but I also wonder if like maybe it would be better to focus on more holiday cards, and I often do. So they're not all Christmas, so they can be distributed to different kinds of like people who you don't know what they celebrate or celebrate different holidays. But also I think I need to make more wintry cards, but Christmas cards are so much fun. And then I wind up making probably more than I need. But how many do you make? So here I've assembled all of my cards, but I haven't embellished all of them. So like on sketch number 5, there's that big area in the center and it needs an embellishment. I embellished the one on camera. It's off to the left there. I put the Santa down, but now I need to embellish the rest of them. So I'm showing you that I kind of batch my process. I batched all of the assembly of the cards, those little plastic packets that I put everything in at the beginning. I love those because when I cut up all the pieces of paper, I can put them back in that plastic packet. Then I cut up all the cardstock mats, put it back in the packet. Then I can sit down at one time and just assemble a whole bunch. Well, what I was doing was just putting this fake foam tape on the back of all of the cut aparts or the bits and pieces that come with the Simple Stories collection. So I've cut up a bunch of like cardstock scraps, and they're double layered, so they're nice and thick, but not too thick. It's like replacing foam tape. It's a little bit thinner than foam tape and a little bit more sturdy because it's layers of cardstock or some cardboard. And then those are all ready on the back so that when I go to assemble my cards, you can see I can pull a card and then pull an embellishment from the stack there. And I don't have to add any additional foam tape or anything because I've already done that in a batch. And if you prefer to use foam tape, if you don't want to use cardboard and cardstock scraps and stuff like I do, then you can do the same thing and just don't peel off the backer sheet, but put all the foam tape on it one time and peel it off instead of gluing it down here. But I like to batch lots of parts of card making when I'm doing these. And so I also will stamp a whole bunch of sentiments. I am using Mama Elephant sentiments from their Easy Christmas Greetings set that lets you stamp 3 sentiments at one time and die cut 3 sentiments at one time. And I'm also going to be using a Tailored Expressions stamp set that allows you to stamp and die cut multiple sentiments at a time. There's a couple of them out there. There's some from LDRS too. I'll have a few linked in the video description in case you are interested in something like that. But this particular bits and pieces collection did come with a lot of words, and I'm a big believer that you don't need to put a sentiment on the front of your cards per se, especially Christmas cards, because I think when you see all those Christmas designs, like here, stockings hung on a fireplace, there's like Santas in the background, stockings, cups, like it's a Christmas card and you're gonna put Merry Christmas inside, so you don't need a sentiment. And that can be a way to save time if you don't want to, like if you're really trying to make things quickly, you're running out of time before the holidays, skipping that outside sentiment. At the same time, your sentiment can also be a focal point. I've done plenty of cards like that where instead of adding a die cut that I have here or coloring an image or whatever, I will instead use like a really big, bold sentiment and I'll let that be the focal point. Eventually, because I wound up making so many cards with this set, I was running out of the bits and pieces. And I recently came across a website called Creative Fabrica, where you can purchase illustrations and then you can print them and cut them out. So you're purchasing the license to printing and using these illustrations, and then you could fussy cut them, but I'm going to use my scan and cut. So here I purchased a digital pack of dinosaurs, and now I can print as many of them as I want. There are a couple different, I think there's like 4 different dinosaurs in the set. Maybe there's like one particular one that I like. I can print multiples. Whereas if I buy another die cut like bits and pieces from Simple Stories, I have to get all of them and I don't get any repeats. So like that bear is super, super cute, but I only get one bear every time. But in order to cut these out with my scan and cut, I need to be conscious of the fact that there are some white elements, because I'm going to go to my scan and cut and I'm going to ask it to scan it in color, and it's going to look for the edges of color. Because they have white hats on them, I need to draw a line in with pencil to tell it, hey, there's an edge there, by adding in that gray color. So if you are trying to ever cut something that is only in color and doesn't have that black stamped edge with your scan and cut, be conscious of any areas that are white and add a little bit of a line in with your pencil and go in and erase it at the end like I am showing here. And I find that I'm generally successful. Again, just want to emphasize, if you're going to be using things like this, you're going to want to scan in color. If you scan the black and white, it's not going to notice the edges. But if I were to cut a stamped image where I stamped it in black and colored it in, then I would scan it in black and white because I do want it to really be looking for the black edges of the stamp. I do have videos on my channel where I share more about how to use my scan and cut, and I show more in detail how I would cut something like this. This is a great solution for when you're making a bunch of cards and you don't want to buy several embellishment packs to go with it. You can print your own designs. Now, I have only just started using Creative Fabrica. They do have a subscription. I have not had enough time to explore it to know if I would recommend that subscription. But I will leave you a link to those dinosaurs, and you can see if there's maybe some other designs. They also have a ton of free designs. I'm going to finish off the cards by stamping an inside sentiment from Sunny Studios. So they have a inside greetings holiday set, and they also have a Christmas set, and then different companies make them. I'll link you to a few of them, but it allows you to really quickly finish off the inside. And I usually like to use a colored ink to stamp the inside, as I think that it just gives it a little pop of something interesting to complete the card. If you found this video inspiring, here's a link to a playlist where you can find more ideas for getting the most out of your supplies. Let me know you like this video with a thumbs up or share to your crafty friends. Subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template tutorial, and check the video description for product links. See you in the next video.